Good evening, guys. Got a little video for you tonight, and I've had a bunch of requests for this, and some people ask me kind of how I clean my magazines and some of the things that I do to my magazines. Because as soon as I get a new magazine, I generally take it apart and I do a little tune-up on it. So I'm gonna cover that with you tonight, and just kind of go over a few little things that I do that kind of I think help me make less mistakes. And I've talked about those in some of my other videos, but so let's get started. Well, right before we get started here, if you like my videos, please hit the subscribe button. I would appreciate it. I try to come out with new content pretty regularly, but every now and then I have some hang-ups. I like to go shoot a lot, so sometimes I get hung up on shooting matches instead of doing videos. So with that out of the way, let's get started on what we're doing here. What we're looking at here is just a basic Ruger 1022 mag. This is a factory Ruger mag, nothing special about this whatsoever. Couple of things that I want to note is that I like the factory Ruger rotary mags over the extended mags, and I think they run a little more reliable. And the reason I think they run a little more reliable is they sit a little bit square in the action. Whereas when you get some of the longer banana mags and things like that, they tend to not always sit straight due to the weight of the mag and things like that, and they don't always feed quite as good as these. So Ruger, I think, as far as factory mags go, really hit a home run with one of these. So these have been pretty good design, and if you keep them pretty clean, even if you don't keep them pretty clean, I've seen people that never clean their mags, they generally run pretty good. So but one of the things that I've noticed on factory mags is the spring tension is not always even. I've seen some that had a lot more tension than others, and some that had less tension than others. And when you hear people talk about the factory mag spring tension, one way you're going to hear them talk about the tension is by the number of flats. So if you kind of look, you've got a little six-sided nut here on the end, and you're going to hear people talk about flats. For me, I have found that generally the optimum amount of tension is going to be 8 flats. So write that down, because that's a key number that you're going to need to know. Now, it's not to say that, hey, if you've got a gun that's running with a little bit lighter spring tension or heavier spring tension, maybe you need to adjust some things. And if you got to go and try 7 flats, that's all right. If you need to try 9 flats, that's all right too. Now, straight out of the box, I have seen these things have anywhere from over 10 flats, 12 flats, to only having like 5 flats of tension. So, like I said, if you get one and you're loading and you think, man, that feels really tight, it might be really tight, and you may need to adjust the tension on it. To do this, it's fairly easy. It doesn't require any special tools, but it does require a couple of tools. And then one of the things that I do, and I'm going to show you kind of how I do it, is if you look at one of these, you can say the only way to know for sure that it's fully loaded would be to try to stick another round in it. If the round doesn't go in it, then it's fully loaded for the most part. Sometimes I like to be able to pick my mags up, and I want to be able to just do a quick look at them and see if they're loaded. So what I do is I drill a little hole in the back of the plate to where when it's fully loaded, see if I can kind of get that to show you. You can see that this is a fully loaded mag right here, and you can see that it has a little brass casing right there on the end of it. So if I strip that round out, one round out, now there is no casing being shown in it, and I know this mag is not fully loaded. One of the most common things that I see people make is they get to talking after they shoot a match or something like that, specifically talking Steel Challenge here, where you go up there, you shoot your 5 stages, And then you come back. And generally, one of the first things you do is you go reload your magazines. Well, sometimes people get to talking, things like that, and then they forget to load their magazines. And it's a real common mistake. It's something I see experienced shooters do. I see inexperienced shooters do it a lot, especially after you have a good round and people ask you questions about it or talk to you about it or something like that, and you forget to load your mags. So I want to be able to walk up there, and if I have any doubt in my mind that I didn't load my mags, I want to be able to look in there really quick and say, hey, that's a loaded mag. So that's why I started putting those little holes in the back of them. I've never had any malfunctions or adverse effects from doing that. Not to say that somebody out there won't figure out some way to mess this up. You probably will, but I've yet to mess one up. So occasionally, this is kind of ammo dependent. I shoot Federal Auto Match for the most part at regular club matches, and it runs pretty clean and it's pretty dry. Some 22 ammo has a lot of lube on it, and that lube builds up inside your mags. And it's good to break them apart because you can see kind of where, like on the lips, you get a lot of just some carbon buildup, some soot. So you get stuff in these mags, and it's good to just take them apart and clean them occasionally. Now, I had one mag that I've had the gun for at least 30 years, and I'd never taken it apart and cleaned it. So now I didn't shoot matches with that one, and I just shot it occasionally and things like that. But I mean, I probably had at least 50,000 rounds to it. But I finally broke it apart, cleaned it. It was very dirty, but that mag still functioned perfectly fine. So let's take this apart. Tools we're going to need to take this apart. We're going to need an Allen wrench. I don't know what size that is, probably around 9/64 something. It fits in the hole. So if you can't figure out how to fit the Allen wrench in the hole, you probably don't need to be taking it apart. I use a pair of calipers for measuring the hole and drilling the holes in the back. And I use a magic marker to mark my flats in the back. You can see this one. You can kind of see where I have made one mark and then I've made another mark right there. And so, like I said, when you're tensioning these, I found 8 flats to be optimal under 95% of circumstances. So, like I said, not to say you can't have a circumstance that requires one less, one more, but I would say you probably don't want to go more than that. The reasoning for going too less, not having enough tension on there is if you don't have enough tension on there and you're shooting fast, like in Steel Challenge, your magazine is not going to feed rounds up at the rate that you need them to. If you have too much spring tension, that's going to cause your bolt to use what little energy that it has available to strip that round off. And, you 22s don't have a lot of energy. The bolts don't have a lot of energy. So it's real easy for them to get hung up on that. And if it gets hung up trying to strip that round out, push it in the chamber and everything, then you're going to end up with a jam. And we don't want that. So 8 flats is the optimum amount. Like I said, you can probably Google that, and the majority of people are going to probably tell you 8 flats. I have ran it with less. I have ran it with more. More generally causes more problems than less. I can start to get to where I outshoot magazine spring tension at about 6 flats if I really try. So I want a little bit of leeway there, so that's why I go one more past 7. I will say that so far at 7, I haven't had any problems, but at 8, I haven't had any problems with reliability or outshooting the mag. So 8 flats. So with that out of the way, what tools we're going to need, we're going to go ahead and take one apart. Like I said, these things are real simple, not a whole lot to it. Putting them back together, you got to hold your tongue right, and I'll probably stick my tongue out and hold it just right when I go to put this back together. It's not hard. There's really not a whole lot that you can mess up, but let's go ahead and take it apart. Like I said, there's one screw, one Allen screw on the back side of it. They're generally not very tight. That is it. I like to put kind of a hand on everything here and just kind of keep it clamped together where it doesn't spring apart. There's not a lot of spring tension on it, but there's a little bit. Pull the Allen screw out. That's pretty much it. This is going to want to push out because there is a spring that when you wind it up gives you tension, but it wants to push. So there we go. It's not violent. It's pretty simple. Comes apart, and that's it. So let's look at the parts, and we're going to go through and clean them real quick, and then I'm going to stop the video, go drill the plate. I'm not going to do a video of me actually drilling the plate. I use a drill press when I drill the plate to drill the hole. You can use a hand drill. You can use kind of whatever you want. These holes are not precision. And basically all you need it is big enough to where you can look in there and see it. This one is an 1/8 inch. You can go smaller. I'm probably going to go at least one size smaller on this next one just to have a slightly smaller hole. You're probably going to want at least a 1/16 of an inch, but I would say no more than an 1/8 of an inch when you drill the hole. While we're looking at the plate here, and I'll cover this one more time, this one's not too dirty. I cleaned this one not too long ago, and I just forgot to drill the hole in it. I just wipe the plates down. Like I said, generally you don't get much more than a dust buildup on them. So just wipe them down, and we're going to set that aside, and I'll cover that a little bit more here in a little bit. You don't need to lube any of the mags. This is the little hex nut. We're going to set that aside, just wipe that off. Not really anything on that. Like I said, this mag was not very old. It's fairly clean. Looking at the body here, there's a little bit of dust buildup in there. It's not bad. You're going to see probably, yeah, you can see where the rim of the cartridges ride. Kind of right here. It's going to create like a little brass rim. So, like I said, this one's not very bad. I'm just going to take a shop cloth, wipe it out real good, wipe off the edges since I've got this. I've seen them a lot worse than this. This one's pretty good overall. The little brass, let me see if I can get that to where it shows you. The little brass ring here, generally that's not just going to wipe off. It generally doesn't hurt anything, and I've never really seen it cause a problem, so I really wouldn't worry about that. So I just kind of try to wipe off any of the larger chunk pieces. Set that aside. Now, these are your two parts. That right here is your follower, and it's got the spring in it. And try not to pull too much. So there on this follower, I said you've got a spring that rides inside of it. You can kind of get an idea. You've got a little piece of the spring tip that comes off here. So if your little tip falls off, it's not the end of the world. That little tip goes in the little hole right here. Let's see if you can, there you go. You can kind of see it right there. Just be sure when you stick it back on there, you've got to get the little tip into that little hole right there. So, like I said, not a big deal. It's not very hard to do. If you accidentally pull on this too much or anything, because sometimes it's a little easier if you kind of pull it out, hold it like that when you go to stick that back in there. If you pull the spring and it unsnaps out, because there's another little tip that rides at an upward angle here, and it sits in that little hole right there. So, like I said, not the end of the world if you pull it out. All this is easy to put back together. Like I said, if you look at it, it's fairly simple to kind of figure out. Like I said, it's not the end of the world if something pops loose or something. So I go through on this and wipe it out. Like I said, you're going to have a little bit of dust buildup in between the ridges where the rounds sit. Um, Sometimes you'll get a little bit of lead buildup on some of the corners. This one's not real dirty, but since I've got it apart, I'm going to go ahead and just wipe it down. Take a Q-tip and just kind of knock the dust out of the edges. Like I said, sometimes, especially if you shoot really greasy rounds, you'll get some grease buildup in here. So just wipe it down, get all that out. Um, I generally probably clean mine about once a year, especially if I end up shooting in the rain or if I shoot in some dirtier conditions or something like that. So, like I said, that's pretty much all there is to that. Wipe it down, get it good and clean. Like I said, you may have to rub on it a little bit more if you shoot some really greasy rounds or anything. But those, like I said, I shoot those Federals are fairly clean. Now these are the lips, and the lips probably get the dirtiest. So, like I said, these are not too bad right here. Just kind of wipe any of the soot out if you have to. If you need to use a little solvent or something to get some things loose, go ahead. Or if you need to use a bore brush or anything, do a little light scrubbing on that. Um, Overall, this one was fairly clean, so it didn't come, I didn't get a whole lot of dirt out of it, but there was a little bit. Give that a wipe down. All right, and that's it as far as cleaning. So, like I said, as far as cleaning goes, these are really fairly simple. Not a whole lot to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go drill this plate. When doing the plate here, what I like to do is, so you'll see that you have a hole on one side, and that's basically where the pin for your lips is going to sit when you go to put it back together. So on the opposite side of that is where you're going to drill your hole. What I do is the measurement is 1/4 of an inch. You can use this is not exact, people. So like I said, if you are using calipers or something, great. Are they necessary? No. I'm not even going to take the time to get to a perfect 1/4 of an inch. I'm slightly less than a 1/4 of an inch, but all I do here is make sure you guys can see this. I go from this corner right here, the little corner that sticks out, and I measure in 1/4 of an inch. So just in case you can't see this. And then all I do is scribe a little mark. So it's kind of hard to get. But that's all I'm doing is going in 1/4 of an inch from that corner. And basically you're just going to go straight in. So let me mark it and see if I can show you on the video here. Kind of got to get the light just right there. But all right, you can kind of see where the little scribe mark is right there. So like I said, literally all I'm doing is coming from this corner straight in 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to drill a hole basically right there where my little scribe mark is. One or a 1/4 of an inch, so 0.250 on my calipers is where I'm going with that. Drill bit size anywhere from 1/16 to no more than an eighth. If you're unsure, you definitely don't want it any larger than the back of a shell. You want it smaller than that because you don't want your shell to get caught in it or hang up in it or anything like that. And we'll cover a little bit more on kind of once I drill it. So I'm going to stop the video here and I'll be right back with you here in just a minute. Okay, back here now, like I said, it only took me a minute to drill that hole out. So got a clean hole through there. Before we only had one hole, now we got two holes. So I did drill a little bit smaller of a hole this time. That's somewhere in between a eighth inch and a 16th. Um, like I said, no bigger than an eighth, but you probably need at least a 16th. One thing to note, when you do drill it, you're going to leave a little burr on whichever side or both sides. I had a burr on both sides. What I do, I've tried a few different things. I've tried taking sandpaper and kind of knocking it down. That works. I also, what I started doing, and I did on this one, is I took a razor blade. And if you kind of catch it just right, you can slide that razor blade across it and cut that little burr right off. And that's what I did on this one. So don't have any burr on this one, and it's basically ready to be put back together now. So I'm going to try to show you this the best I can. Like I said, some of it you've got to hold your tongue just right. So your little plate here, we're going to start with that. The little plate, you're going to need the plate, the nut, and the follower. It's easier for me to generally put the little plate or the little nut into the end plate there. And then, like I said earlier, you have this little nipple that sticks out of the spring here. That does need to go into a hole on the flat. So you can see where the little hole in the flat is right there. So I got to get that put together and caught in it. Like I say, if you can kind of catch it just right, and it'll want to feed into it. And once it catches, you can take fingernail and kind of push it in a little further. Sometimes you can catch these when you go to take them apart. And you can keep it from coming apart. But if you're going to drill it, you got to have this little piece off. So, like I said, other videos will tell you to try to not take that little part out. It's not that bad. This one's got a little more angle to it than some of the other ones I've had, and it's not one to catch good. I'll grab a little flat-headed screwdriver real quick. Kind of makes it a little easier having a little flat-headed screwdriver. I'm just using a little bitty pocket screwdriver. Promise you, normally these are significantly easier than this. There you go. And it's funny, you catch it just right and it goes right in. So that's all there is to that. So when you can go ahead and set the lips on here. You're going to have, if you notice on your feed lips, you're going to have one end that's got a smaller protrusion, and then the other end that's going to be a larger protrusion. Larger protrusion is going to go into the larger hole on the end of it there. These kind of sit at an angle. Like I said, it's one of those things where it's not very hard. And the first time you take it apart, you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. Just sits on there, just like that. So what I do here is I go ahead and I slide my Allen screw in there, because that's going to act as your spindle that your spring's going to ride into. Now, one thing you can do here to kind of help kind of set yourself up for success is you're going to notice there is a fatter end here. And that is going to be the end that sits up against the bottom side of the feed lips. So when you get this together, even if you don't have it lined up, it's not the end of the world. You'll see what I mean here in just a second. So if I didn't have that part in there, you can basically spin this. So like right now it's not in it, and if I spin it, you're going to feel it hit, and you're going to feel this stop, and you're going to feel where there's wanting to be some tension against the back of that. Now, here's where I use my marker. What I do is I put it into the flat, and I'll push it in right about where it's got the least amount of tension on it, and that's my starting point. When you push it in, it's going to push out your nut just a tick, and that's okay for now. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my marker, and it doesn't matter where you mark it. All you need to do is mark it to where you can have a place to count from. So I'm going to just simply mark it right there. And you can kind of see what I did there. So now all I'm going to do is if you push on that, that's going to pop your little nut back out back there. And all I'm going to do is wind that 8 flats. So you're going to go one full rotation where it's even with that, where even with your mark right there, and then you're going to go 2 more flats. So this is the part that you have to sometimes hold your tongue just right, and I might make faces when I do this. So I try to kind of like rewind it. Okay. All right. And it just all popped apart on me. So try this one more time, and of course my little nut popped out right there with that. Pull that spring out just a little bit, because it went in a whole lot easier when I did that earlier. I'm going to record all the way through this, and you can see my frustration with these sometimes. Like I said, they're really not that bad. Once you do a couple of them, they're really not that bad. So, okay. And what I did on that is I pulled the spring a little too hard, and I pulled it out of the little groove, and I pulled the spring too far back in there. So you got to kind of push that back in. And sometimes this is kind of a bit of a headache if you do this. So this is about as big of a mistake as you can make with this. It's not the end of the world. I'm gonna grab a little pair of needle nose, and I'll go over my tool list since I've added a few tools here since this started. If I can grab that spring on in there. I can't quite grab it yet. Okay. So I pulled the spring all the way back through now. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna grab that to where I can kind of walk it in. And I missed. Oh, it's almost right there. There it goes. All right. So spring pop back in the hole. Maybe get it through this time. There we go. All right. Unbelievably, it all kind of went back together right there now. Okay, so we're going to try this one more time. Put my feed lips back on. Slide that back in. Let's see if I can get it to pop in from right there. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with, I'm going to turn my thing until I feel it hit. Now stop. I've already got my marks, so they should line back up again. They do line back up again. All right. So I'm going to hold my tongue just right. All right, there's one full turn. And then there is the next two. All right. So if you can see, I've got my marks. You can see where the bottom mark is pointing 2 flats further down from where I initially marked it. Oh, don't go. Yeah, it popped out. Luckily, I kept everything together other than the spring tension. Okay. There, got it right there. So now I'm going to use my Allen wrench, and I'm just going to snug that down to where I feel it catch without pushing too hard. If you push too hard, you're going to push that little nut back out, and you don't want to do that again. All right. These don't need to be super tight. Like I said, I just snug them up, hand tight, and that's it. They generally don't want to come loose. And now it is a fully assembled magazine with the little visibility hole in the back. So what we'll do is, let me grab a box of ammo here. We're going to put 10 rounds in it and make sure I can see everything and make sure I don't feel any burrs or anything like that. Make sure everything feels like it functions right. All right, it should be round 10 right there. It is. Can't fit any more in it. And I can see it. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. Yeah, you can see it just barely right there. So I know it's a fully loaded mag, and this mag's good to go. So you can strip the rounds out and just make sure everything functions right, make sure nothing hangs up. Everything seemed pretty good. So I'm happy with that. Everything's working good, and you got your little sight hole drilled. So, like I said, ended up using a couple of extra tools in what I started out with. Sometimes these fight you a little bit. Sometimes they go back together, and it's just like, man, why can't they do that every single time? Ended up using not a whole lot of tools. Ended up using the Allen wrench to take everything apart. Ended up using the calipers to mark my spot for drilling. And like I said, you can use a tape measure, use whatever you got to measure a quarter of an inch. Used a marker. to mark my flats, and you can see my flats. You can see the mark right there on the side initially where I started, and then you can see the one kind of on the bottom where I went two flats past for a total of 8 flats. Um, Now, if the springs fight you a little bit, a little bitty pocket screwdriver or any little bitty flat-headed screwdriver is pretty handy to have. And then I just used a little pair of needle nose pliers. So, like I said, I hope this was helpful to you. Like I said, it's not really hard. And like I said, if I wasn't sitting here trying to video and record everything, I could have done this a whole lot faster than what I normally. Normally takes me maybe 10 minutes to do everything with the drilling and everything. So you don't need a drill press. You can use a hand drill, like I noted earlier. I used a drill press. You want to try to get the hole fairly straight. You don't want it at an angle or anything. Like I said, be sure to clean off your burrs and everything. And really, that's about it. Like I said, that's my final thoughts on that. Hope you found it helpful, and hope this improves your game a little bit. And like I said, if you run into me out at a match, please come talk to me. I like talking about guns. It's one of my favorite things. So we'll see you on the range.